Learning Curves and Coffee, where we skip the perfection, spill the real, and talk parenting, teaching, and personal growth over a hot cup. I'm Ivory, a mother, edupreneur, and your caffeinated co-pilot through the meltdowns, meetings, and magical moments. Let's get into it. Welcome back to Learning Curves and Coffee. Grab your coffee, settle in, and let's talk about something that has been sitting heavy on my heart. Today's conversation isn't just for parents. It's never just for parents, quite frankly. It's for educators, school leaders, counselors, advocates, caregivers, families who are supporting parents raising neurodiverse children. Anybody who has ever looked at a family and thought, why aren't they more involved? Why don't they come to meetings? Why don't they advocate more? Why don't they respond to emails? We've heard this, right? Maybe you've said it if you are an educator or a school leader or a counselor or a friend of a parent, right? And so in today's podcast, I want to challenge a narrative that I think quietly exists in education and parenting spaces. And honestly, sometimes it's not quiet, sometimes it's loud. The belief that all parents are starting from the same place. And if they're not getting the same outcomes, it must be because some parents care more than others. That is the belief, and that is the narrative that reverberates in circles in schools and parenting spaces, right? And not only do I not believe it's true, I know that it's not true because I lived it and I saw it firsthand as a school leader. In fact, I think it's one of the most damaging and dangerous myths that we tell ourselves. Because what if the issue isn't love? What if the cause is access? What if the issue is access? What if the issue is knowledge? What if the issue are the systems? What if some families are being asked to climb mountains while others are simply walking uphill? If you can picture that metaphor, right? I want to introduce you to someone. Her name is Danielle, is 32. She works full-time at a warehouse. She is raising 2 children. She believes she lives paycheck to paycheck. Her son has recently been identified as autistic. Danielle loves her son deeply. She wants the best for him. But here's what Danielle doesn't know. She doesn't know what an IEP is. She doesn't know what executive functioning means. She doesn't know what occupational therapy does. She doesn't know she can request evaluations. She doesn't know how to challenge school decisions. She doesn't know what accommodations are available. She doesn't know what questions to ask. And it's not because she doesn't care. It's because nobody ever taught her. It's because she doesn't live in a world where that language is used. It's because she has not been exposed to these type of conversations, right? So imagine one day she receives a school email that says, please review the evaluation report and attend the eligibility determination meeting, right? You hear all these buzzwords in that email: evaluation report, eligibility, determination. That can be intimidating to anyone, let alone a parent who does not have the background to understand. The school thinks simple. We sent the email, check off our box. However, Danielle, the parent, thinks, what does this even mean? Am I in trouble? Is my son going to get kicked out of school? Right? Those are the questions. I've been there firsthand. When we call a parent, when we send an email, when we send a notice, first thing that most parents want to know, the everyday parent who is working hard to pay the bills, did my son or my child do anything wrong? Are they getting kicked out of school? Right? Do I need a lawyer? Do I have to miss work? Am I going to lose pay? Do I have to pay for something? Like, these are questions that run in the mind of a parent who is operating from a deficit. And suddenly what looks like parent disengagement, because a parent may not respond as they go through these questions of what is about to happen. What looks like parent disengagement is actually fear, right? One of the biggest misconceptions in parenting and education, as I sit at the intersection of both, is that everybody starts from the same place. Let me be very clear. They do not. After years of being in the classroom, years of working in a school, engaging with hundreds of parents, there was no one parent that was the same. Okay? Research has shown that opportunity is heavily influenced by neighborhood conditions, school quality, economic mobility, healthcare access, transportation, and social capital. So Ivory is not making this up. This has been studied and proven. Additional research demonstrates that where children grow up significantly impacts future educational and economic outcomes. Now, let me be clear. I'm the first one to say that there are exceptions to the rule and there are outliers. I am one of them. I come from a community that was significantly impacted by low socioeconomic circumstances and lack of access to opportunities. And I made it out. But that is the other reason why I can tell you I saw firsthand and I lived it, the impact that it has on majority of the people who live in said communities. There's a book called The Color of Law that details how housing segregation and redlining, right? Look up what redlining is, shapes educational opportunities for generations. So while we are quick to say that parents need to be more engaged, parents need to be more involved, we also need to be aware of the intentional policies and systems in place that keep certain people from accessing quality education because of the communities that have been zoned and barriered for particular people in the United States. I know I'm going on a tangent and I'm giving you all a bit of a history rundown, but I have to provide that context, right? And a sociologist, Annette LaRue, I hope I'm pronouncing her last name correctly, found that middle-class families often possess institutional knowledge that helps them navigate schools more confidently and effectively, while working class families and not even working class families who lean on public assistance primarily for survival often carry just as deeply, but often care, and while working class and families who depend on public assistance primarily care just as deeply, but have less familiarity with institutional expectations. That's important. We're not buying into the hype or the messaging that families from working class and low socioeconomic communities care less about their children. It is simply not true. Because caring and knowing are not the same thing. And too often, we as educators and parents with access to opportunity, we confuse the two. And I want to speak specifically to educators for a moment. As a former teacher, as a former school leader, as a former counselor, and as a parent, when I was younger in my career, I also was guilty of asking that question. Why aren't parents showing up? Why aren't they responding to my emails and my phone calls? Why aren't they advocating for their child? But now, at this big age, with this wisdom, and have worked in the education system for, this is my 17th year, my questions look different. Instead, I'm asking, what barriers might families be facing? Let's think about what we often call an engaged parent. Maybe that looks different than what you originally perceived an engaged parent looking like, right? Attending meetings at 2 p.m., reading a 2-page evaluation report, understanding education jargon, responding quickly to emails, advocating with confidence and clarity, knowing all your rights, navigating healthcare systems. Those aren't just parenting behaviors. Most of those are resource dependent behaviors. Those are not indicators of an engaged parent. Those are indicators of a skilled parent, right? That type of skill requires time, requires knowledge, requires confidence, requires access, requires transportation, requires flexibility in employment, requires prior positive experience with institutions like schools and the people who run these institutions. Again, it requires prior positive experiences. I have mentioned in the past that many parents, and a fellow parent had to flag this for me because I'm deviating for a moment, but this is going to come full circle. I realize I operate often with a bit of a dual identity as an educator and both the parent, and sometimes it has an overlap, but more so I sit in like an educational space, and my blinders are often up around how a lot of parents are intimidated by school systems, even parents who have access to education and opportunity, right? Because they've had prior negative experiences, and particularly parents who have grown up in under-resourced communities and who have gone to schools that have treated them unfairly. As a child who saw it firsthand, right? You grow up and become an adult who remembers those experiences. And so while you send your kid to school, you don't necessarily feel good and warm and fuzzy about the school experience overall, right? And if we aren't careful, we begin measuring privilege instead of measuring love. There's a difference there. And I know that is a hard truth to sometimes swallow, but I think especially Actually, I know, especially as educators, that it's very important to sit with that truth, right? It helps you to shift your perspective and lean into empathy with parents who don't have access to those said privileges. Last podcast episode, I talked about this idea of this myth, I should say, of the quote default human, quote unquote. The idea is that systems are often built around assumptions that about what a typical person looks like and how they should function. And everyone else gets measured against that standard. And when they don't fit, then they become a problem. And of course, I couldn't stop thinking about how this especially impacts neurodiverse families, right? Families who have children who are neurodiverse, autistic, ADHD, dyslexic, so on and so forth. Because many schools, healthcare systems, and parenting conversations are built around assumptions. The parent understands educational language, that they have access to internet, right? Even basic necessities we're leaning into assumption around. That they can leave work easily. Many parents don't have that as a privilege and opportunity. And we know that there are higher rates of school disciplinary issues for our children who are neurodiverse. So where does that leave a parent who works full time and does not have flexibility in their work? We also operate in the assumption that parents feel comfortable challenging professionals, and they do not. We have assumptions that parents know where to find resources. Many do not. But what happens when these assumptions are challenged? That burden also falls upon families. And often that burden turns into shame and guilt. So I want to take this through the discovery, acceptance, and embracing lens for both parents and educators. Discovery asks, what assumptions am I making? If I'm a parent, what am I judging myself for not knowing? That's a very important question to ask, because you don't know what you do not know, and that is okay. For educators, what assumptions am I making about families right now? What behaviors am I interpreting without understanding context? Both parties must remember that awareness is where transformation and understanding begins. Acceptance means acknowledging a difficult truth. It is not that difficult. We see it every day. But maybe for some it is difficult if they don't see this or if they don't have a clear understanding. But not all families start from the same place. Not all families have the same resources. Not all families have access to the same information. And yet every family deserves dignity. Every family deserves support. And every family deserves the opportunity to learn. Right? And acceptance means releasing the idea that needing help is a personal failure. Remember, I just told you the historical context. There are social constructs built so that people aren't able to learn. So it's not always a personal failure, right? And lastly, embracing says, I can learn what I was never taught. So the first stage is obviously acknowledging the barriers, acknowledging the gap, acknowledging the inequity. But you don't stop there, and you don't make that an excuse. As a parent, you lean into, what can I now learn? What questions do I need to ask? Where can I get support? Where can I grow? And educators can stop confusing access with effort. It's not the same thing. Because families don't need more judgments, they need more bridges. I want to end with this. This is the only tool I have to leave you with today because I think it has the power to change everything. Shame sounds like, I should know this. I should understand this report. I should know how to advocate. I should know how to help my child. But curiosity sounds like, what does this mean? Can someone explain this to me? Who can help me understand? What questions should I be asking? And let me be clear. I've been in the education space for 17 years. I've been in several IEP meetings for students that I have taught. And even to this day, in my own son's IEP meeting, I still have questions. I still ask, what does that mean? What does this look like in practice? How does this show up in the classroom? I'm still learning. It is a journey, right? Some of us are farther along than others, depending on the category. But this parenting lifestyle is truly it is a classroom. You're always learning. So replace shame with curiosity. And as educators, replace assumptions with curiosity. So ask more questions. That single shift can transform relationships, both between parents and educators and with students as well. Lastly, many parents carry shame for lacking knowledge when what they actually lack was access. That is the takeaway. And you cannot shame yourself as a parent into information. Curiosity can only lead you there. Okay, so disarm the shame. So, Danielle, who I mentioned at the top of this podcast, she is not real, but millions of families are living versions of her story. And if you're a parent listening today, I want you to hear this. Not knowing doesn't make you a bad parent. Learning later doesn't mean you have failed. Asking questions doesn't mean you're behind. It means you are growing. And to the educators that are listening, the parents who seem disengaged may actually be overwhelmed. The parents who appear resistant may actually be confused. The parents who miss the meetings may actually be surviving, because we judge behavior. Before we judge behavior, we must learn to understand the context. When we replace assumptions with empathy, and when we replace judgment with understanding, everybody improves, especially our children. So, until next time, keep discovering and accepting and embracing, honey. And remember, your starting point is not your destiny, but you have to start somewhere. Take care of yourselves. Bye. And as always, take care of yourself. Bye. Hi, welcome back. Thank you for tuning in per usual. This is Learning Curves and Coffee